Hey, I'm Frank Baldwin. I graduated from Pacific 48 years ago in psychology, and thank you for coming to be part of this presentation by Austin White, who is a world languages major in French. Her thesis, French wine industry confronts globalization, tradition versus innovation. I'm delighted to see that you brought samples for later. Would you join me in welcoming Austin?
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming today. I'd like to start by telling you guys how I came to find this topic. I was studying abroad in France, and I went on my first ever wine tour, and I was really thrown into the world that is French wine. It was overwhelming. There's a lot to know with the classification system, but at the same time, very exciting. Beyond that, just studying abroad in France, I was exposed to a new culture around drinking, purchasing, and enjoying wine that I really enjoyed while I was there. So when I came back, I knew that I wanted to do something with the French wine industry. So I was searching around for articles, and I found this one that said French wine in crisis. And I thought that was really interesting, and I really gravitated toward that because having just been in France, it was not apparent to me at all that there was any crisis. Everyone was drinking wine, enjoying wine. All the producers were selling wine. So I really just delved into that topic from there. Okay, so this is just a roadmap of the presentation to see where we'll go as we work through it for you guys. We'll start with an overview, give you guys a foundation to build so that we know what the crisis is when we get it and we can understand it. We'll start with Old World wine and inside of that French wine and French wine law and how that's really used to market French wine, and then contrast that to New World wine and their marketing techniques. And that'll really give the background information necessary to understand the crisis, so then we'll talk about that. And we'll transition into kind of the resistance both to recognize and react to the crisis from France itself due to their view of wine as a cultural product. And then we'll see if we can find some kind of solution or resolution at the end. So let's get started. There are two main distinctions in wine. There's Old World wine and New World wine. Old World wine are just countries that have traditional wine-growing regions in Europe and parts of the Middle East. Spain, Italy, France, of course. One of the main things with Old World wine are the heavy restrictions that come with production, the fermentation process, as well as marketing. There's a lot of strict regulation around all of those aspects, which we'll talk about more later. In terms of the draw to Old World wine, one of the main draws is that when you open a bottle of Old World wine, you're really drinking the heritage of that country, because you're drinking something that's been produced the same way for centuries, oftentimes by the same family for generations. So there's this kind of romantic notion around Old World wine. And then the other main point I want to bring up with Old World wine is that it really focuses on the region where the wine was grown versus the producer. So inside of Old World wine is obviously where France resides. And their main system for classification is the AOC, or l'Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée. And really what that gave to France was a way, it was established in 1935, and the principal reason was to say a product from that area or a certain place in France could really only be sold and marketed as a product from that place. So a great example of this is champagne. I don't know if all of you know this, but you really only had champagne if it came from the Champagne region in France. Otherwise, it was just sparkling wine. And the AOC system is what gave France the right to do that and kind of the right to regulate who can call what other places. So they really had a lot of power marketing their different regions inside of the country. The system itself, this is just an image that tells you the different classifications of the AOC system. But the system is very intricate, it's detailed, it's complex, it's time-consuming to kind of work through, and we'll see some examples later that really demonstrate that point. But the main thing that the French wine laws gave to France as a marketing technique was to really export this idea of terroir. Terroir is so important, we'll talk about on its own slide. What is terroir? The question that a lot of scholars have had a hard time defining, particularly with just the translation aspect of it, but for the purposes of this presentation, we'll just say that it's the taste of place. So different things go into that. First, there's the soil. So you can have like really rocky soil, or for example, in Burgundy, you have a lot of limestone, and you also have these fossilized oyster beds. So when the vines grow down through that, they really take a lot of that flavor, and it's shown, and it comes out in the product, in the wine. Then you have the climate, if it's hot or cool. You also have, of course, sun exposure, the slope of the hill that the vines are growing on, as well as the elevation. Those are all the terrain aspect. And then you have these traditional production techniques that have been used regionally around France as well that play into it. And like I said, this is the main thing that France uses as their marketing technique. People actually refer to French wine as terroir-driven wine. And it just basically says, we have this unique individual terroir that you can't get anywhere else. You can drink a Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley, and it'll be totally different than a Pinot Noir from Burgundy, for example. And it really just gave them a way to say, you can make the same varietal, which is just the grape type, like Chardonnay or Pinot Grigio or something, but it really won't be the same as our French wine because of our unique terroir. Okay. So for New World wine, the other side of the story, basically these are just countries that are all the ones that are not Old World countries. Traditionally, a lot of them were colonies. So you have the United States, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, Chile, Canada. One important thing to note is that they actually already kind of use the idea of terroir. They kind of said, okay, this Old World has a good idea, we'll take that and use it for ourselves, but also they have less restriction around their production processes and how they're allowed to market. So they kind of get to use the best marketing technique of France and give it to people in a way that's easier to understand. And then it really embodies this entrepreneurial spirit as well of the producer. So it really focuses on what the producer wants to do, what the producer wants to bring out in a certain wine by choosing different grapes to make a different aspect come out. So it's really kind of more about what the producer's doing versus totally what the terroir is bringing out in the wine. And that's another main distinction. So in terms of marketing differences, I'd like to zero in now on actually just the labeling aspect of French wine, and then compare it to New World wine again. So what information can be displayed? This is something that's really interesting. On French wine labels, you're not actually allowed, if the wine is produced and also sold in France, to display the varietal, which is funny because when most U.S. consumers think about going to buy wine, you buy predominantly by varietal. You choose based on the grape type. You walk into Safeway or Fred Meyer, and it's organized like that. It's so predominant in New World countries. But in France, it's not allowed because you have this unique system for displaying the information and what's found in the bottle. So I want to work through this example with you guys just to kind of show you that process. Starting up here in the left-hand corner, it says Vin de Bourgogne, which just means that it's a Burgundian wine, or from the wine region of Burgundy. So inside of France, you have many different regions, like Bordeaux, or Alsace, the Loire Valley, Burgundy. And then inside of that Burgundy region, we see that it's Macon Village, which is actually the region where the grapes were grown. So then inside of that, you have the estate where the grapes were grown, which is Domaine de Champs Brûlés. And then underneath here, you can see that it is an Appellation Macon Village Contrôlé, so it is an AOC wine, so it does have to adhere to very strict regulation. Then, of course, it has the vintage, alcohol content and things, but you can really see if you have multiple regions, and then inside of those regions, many, many more regions, and then estates, how it can get really intricate to figure out, where your wine is coming from. And then also, if you're trying to find out what kind of wine you're drinking, certain varietals can only be grown in certain regions. So, for example, in Burgundy again, if it's a red wine, it has to be Pinot Noir. That's all they're allowed to produce. And if it's a white wine, it has to be Chardonnay. So you'd have to go through, find out that it's a Burgundian wine, find the village or the appellation and all these different things, and then you'd know the varietal. And in a lot of other regions, there's multiple varietals that are varied by the region inside. So you can see that it's a big process to figure out all of these things, and it's really time-consuming. Comparatively to New World wine bottles, this is very different. They're very simplified. There's usually a nice image. The varietals predominantly displayed. This is just a great visual example. This is obviously a New World wine. It's got a nice picture here. You kind of are drawn to that. Yellowtail out of Australia. Varietals easily displayed. There have actually been studies that show a lot of repeat purchases with a memorable image, which makes sense. I mean, if you drank a wine 3 months ago and you go to try to find it again in the supermarket or something, and you see a wall full of wines that look like this, it might be a little harder to remember what you bought, but if you go back, oh yeah, the kangaroo, that's right. And so then you go right to that wine. So this is just a good example of the differences. So with the crisis itself, now that we kind of understand all of the nuances of what's going on, the main thing that's happening is there's this new consumer base. There's this kind of younger generation, this emerging market that's coming, and they're predominantly millennials. And millennials have very particular purchase preferences. And one of those things is that they really want to buy varietal, so they want to be shown to them that way. And then they also don't want to spend as much time researching and doing different things with wine. Everyone's busy, doesn't have enough time. So they kind of want the process to be easier for them. They want to be able to go in, pick something, and just kind of get it done. And on top of that, you also have a risk factor that's associated with buying wine for millennials. You don't want to make the wrong purchase. You know, if your friends tell you they're having a party or something and they have this meal planned, and you show up with the total wrong type of wine, you don't want to do that. So you kind of want to have some direction, you know, with the wine bottle itself, telling you kind of what you're getting with the wine. The best way to work through this is some more examples. So here we have, obviously, a New World millennial-style wine bottle. Sea glass. It's got a nice picture here of some sea glass. The bottle itself is kind of a nice sea glass color. And the back is really what I want to let you guys hear because it's perfect. Patiently, nature transforms humble elements into something timeless and transcendent. This Sauvignon Blanc captures the best of Santa Barbara's unique terroir. Tropical fruit aromas and a clean grassiness yield to a well-balanced acidity. Enjoy with shellfish, lighter pasta dishes, and summer salads. So you finish reading this, and you basically know everything. You know what to pair it with. You have what it's going to taste like. It even talks about terroir on the bottle. It tells you, you know, it takes that idea right there. So that's a good example of just what the New World is doing. This is a bottle of French wine that I actually bought in France, so you can notice that the varietal's not on here anywhere. You would be able to work through the label similar to the way we did before. But, I mean, it looks pretty fancy, so that's going for it, that's good. And you always have, you know, the wine connoisseurs who really do want to go through this process and understand the whole system and all of the regions. So it will hit that market well. But then this bottle is another good example. This is a French wine that was exported and sold here in the United States. I bought this world market. So it's got a little image, so that's something that they're trying to kind of do a little bit. And it does, French wine, they did change the law so that you're allowed to display the varietal on bottles that are exported out of the country. But this example is good because even though you have the varietal here, you're missing all of the kind of intricate and fun process here that you go through of the kind of the fine wine niche of the market, but it also isn't really hitting the same visual appearance or kind of that end of the market either. So it's kind of missing on both ends. You're missing that fine wine market and you're also missing the millennial generation who's going to be more gravitated toward these bottles. So that's really just a good overview of the millennial demands kind of and preferences with purchasing. So we have the New World who is doing that and really wants to buy by varietal and market it that way. And then you have the Old World who's really just marketing by region, and you can kind of see the problem there too. And then on top of that, we have the AOC system that gave us terroir, which is great, but is also extremely restrictive.